Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content. Paris, 1914. The rumble of artillery can be heard on the streets of France's capital. German forces are advancing so rapidly that the taxi drivers of Paris have been pressed into service. And now, rather than ferry Parisians to cafes and theater performances, they rush soldiers to the front lines of a war. In her laboratory at the esteemed Sorbonne University, Dr. Marie Curie looks at rows of equipment that now lay dormant. All of her graduate students have left to join the war effort. This was where she discovered two new elements, where she and her late husband laid the groundwork for the study and understanding of radiation, discoveries that would change the world forever. But for now, there is no research to be done. There is war. And Dr. Curie knows she can help. She is a double Nobel laureate, the only person in history to earn the award in two different scientific fields. But now she too is called to action. Using her advanced equipment and her unparalleled expertise with radiology, she and her 17-year-old daughter load up a truck with X-ray machines and radiation therapy equipment and head out to the front lines to help treat wounded soldiers. Professor Curie may be one of the most brilliant scientific minds in history, but today, she is going to help defend her home, and she promises to save as many lives as possible in the process. Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here, as always, with my co-host, Dr. Pat Larish. Pat, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Ben?
I'm doing okay. I know you are a high school teacher, and I had a question for you because I know the answer for me, but I was curious for you. What was your worst subject in school?
Ooh, sensitive topic, kind of.
None? You were just awesome at everything? You loved school and you committed 100% to every class.
No, I think it's just going back to that time in my life when I was awkward. I mean, I'm still awkward, but, I was particularly awkward. I think I would have to say gym class,
Gym class. Okay. Why was that?
I don't know. I think I didn't quite get it. Okay, here we are, and we have to change into our little gym shorts and whatever, and we have to do the things. And I think I never quite, at that age, I never quite got the rationale behind it. Now, older, many decades later, I'm like, okay, yeah, we have to exercise, and we're beings with bodies, and we have to use them, or I don't know, whatever. But at the time, I was like, why are we doing this? This seems repetitive and kind of pointless. So yeah, I never really got into it.
See, I have the opposite where at the time I was like, oh, people like this. So like, this is probably fun. I get to, I had a good friend, my friend Matt, and I used to hang out at gym class. It was fun. But for me, looking back at it now, many decades later, it's weird that gym class counted the same for your GPA as math, right?
Ooh. Yeah.
They have an equal weight for your GPA. It was weird for me because you had to change clothes at school.
Yeah.
Like I hated that. You had to go into a locker room with all your like idiot classmates and change clothes into these like gnarly gym clothes and run around, I guess.
Yeah. And they were pretty gnarly.
Mm-hmm. And
like there was a specific type of regulation gym short.
Yeah. It's not flattering, not fun to wear.
Flattering,
just,
no.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe that was the point. Maybe it was an equalizer. Everyone has to wear unflattering shorts.
Yeah. It's just
I don't know.
Group humiliation. Yeah. It's like boot camp. But so, I mean, and for me, so I went to to school in Florida. So for me, it's a hot, and then you have to change back, and you got to go back to class afterwards, right? So for me, my worst class, the class I hated the most of any class I ever took in my entire school career, was senior year physics, which was immediately after gym class. So I'd have to go out and change and run around, which I liked it enough, but it was weird. You had to change back into your regular. I went to Catholic school, so I had school uniform. I'd change back into my school uniform, which was long pants in Florida, and go back into class and try to understand the coefficient of friction while I'm like sweating and like. It was awful. It was awful. But for me, my worst class, grades wise and enjoyment wise, was physics. I disliked it intensely. It was the combination of two things I was bad at, math and science, and I didn't enjoy it, and I never got it. My wife is a mathematician, and she makes fun of me because she's like, "Oh, it's so easy. It just makes sense." But it did not make sense to me, and it never has, and it never will. I cannot understand it, and just it's completely lost on me, and there's no amount of YouTube videos I can watch that will explain to me how this works in a way that will track with my brain.
Yeah. Well, presumably it makes sense to Mother Nature.
It clearly does, because there is a very set law of things, that the way the world works, and that is the way the world works, and there's very little debate on it. But for me, physics, it was impossible. It was impossible, and it was like the only time I ever got a D in high school was in physics. Oh. Yeah, it was bad. I got in trouble and I didn't like it. But because physics is so difficult for me, I do have a respect for people who are good at it, I suppose.
I want to just give a shout out to all of our physicist listeners.
Yes, I have.
Plural.
I have friends that are gym teachers, and I have friends that are physicists. And,
shout out to all of them. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And so we are going to talk about a physicist today, and one of the all-time titans of physics and chemistry. I actually liked chemistry better than I liked physics because it had less math involved. But I guess all of this is kind of a caveat into me saying that the person we are going to talk about today, Madame Marie Curie, one of the most badass scientists to ever live, she was an amazing physicist, and I can appreciate that she is very brilliant at a thing at which I am very poor. But I just kind of want to caveat our listeners to say that I am not going to attempt to explain any of the physics things that she did in any level of detail, because I don't understand it and I never will.
And you know what? That's okay, because we can tell her story, and it's clear from her story, without all the physics footnotes and diagrams and whatever, that she's a badass. And even if one is not clear on the technical details, you can still roll with it. So let's tell the story of Marie Curie.
Yes, we are going to get into the story of Marie Curie. She was a physicist, a chemist, a double Nobel laureate, which has never been done between two different fields of science. She was a war hero. She was a humanitarian. Just when you think, badass scientist, there's so much more going on to the story that is really interesting and really exciting.
Oh, yeah.
And that I'm really excited to talk about. And I think you guys are going to really enjoy the story. So we are going to take a really quick break. We're going to hear a word from our sponsors. And after that, we are going to get into the story of Madame Curie and her 2 Nobel Prizes. Maria Sklodowska was born in 1867 in Warsaw, Poland, which at the time was part of the Russian Empire. We are talking about the partitions of Poland time period where Poland was divided up between Austria, Prussia, and the Russian Empire. And her family was Polish and had been fairly wealthy in Poland, but lost their property and their money due to their involvement in being Polish nationalists and not wanting Russia and Austria and Germany to dominate their country. Being marked as a Polish nationalist was very hard for the Skłodowska family because it made it really hard for her parents to find work. They'd both been, they'd both been teachers. And Maria and her sister kind of grew up being taught by her parents, but her parents were having a hard time finding work. They had no money. They were struggling, whereas they had kind of been upper middle class in the glory days of Poland. So Maria and her sister, they're learning from their parents. And Maria, she has a real aptitude for physics and science and all of those other things that I mentioned in the open that I'm bad at.
But we can appreciate other people being good at.
I appreciate it more because it is so impossible for me to wrap my head around it that anybody who understands it is kind of like has attained this level of enlightenment that I will never achieve, right?
Yeah.
So Maria, she went through school and she applied to the University of Warsaw, but the University of Warsaw didn't accept female students in, the 1880s. This is the no girls allowed rule that we keep seeing come up every time we talk about anybody who lived before 1980.
Mm-hmm.
And
and on top of that, her family has ties to nationalist organizations.
Right, which is a bad look if you are in Warsaw, which is controlled by the Russians right now, and they don't like Polish nationalism because that's anti-Russian. And so what they do is, after high school, Maria, she goes to work in a factory. Her and her sister go to work in a factory, which is blue collar work. But they also get involved with this kind of secret underground free university, they called it, which was like secret college.
Ooh, so who went to secret college? Who went to the free university?
So Maria Skłodowska, she's there, and she's not only learning there, but she's also tutoring the other women that she's working with in the factory. So she's working with these kind of blue collar women in this factory. This is 1887 time period. And she is kind of tutoring these other Polish women in Warsaw about, hey, actually, like, here's some Polish history stuff. Here's some political stuff. Here's some math knowledge. Here's some science. Here's some subversive stuff, right? Like, knowledge is power and is sedition. And we are kind of, this is almost like this is kind of revolutionary, right?
It kind of is. Yeah. Yeah.
And some of what she's doing is literally just teaching these women to read, which is powerful for them.
It's very powerful. Yeah. 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 I mean, honestly, teaching people to read in and of itself is badass. But this is Marie Curie, or Marie Skłodowska. She's got other interests too.
Yeah.
What does she do?
Yeah, so she's doing her best, right? She's learning from whatever tutors she can like secretly work with, and she is secretly tutoring other women how to read and write and learn things. But she wants
do math and
do math. She wants more, right? This isn't. She knows that there's more out there, and she wants it, and she keeps applying to schools all throughout Europe. And when she's 24, she gets accepted into the Sorbonne University in Paris, which is extremely prestigious university. And they did take women students, but it wasn't super common, especially at age 24, because most people are going to college earlier.
So she's entering the Sorbonne at a slightly older age than some of her classmates. And yeah, okay, fine. Honestly, probably gave her an edge.
Yeah, I would think so. I was like a real dumbass when I went to college, and if I had gone at 24, I think I'd have done a lot better. Yeah.
Oh, hindsight, whatever. Yeah. So yeah, but anyway, she's at the Sorbonne. She's doing her thing. She's getting educated.
Yeah. So she gets into the Sorbonne, and she is she's excelling in math and science. She is very talented in those fields. She's progressing really well. And around this point, when she's at the Sorbonne, she's introduced to a guy who is running a lab at a nearby university, and his name is Pierre Curie. He's a professor. He's 10 years older than Maria Sklodowska, and he is running this kind of little lab, but it's physics-based, and it's pretty gritty what he's working on, and it's kind of in line with what she's working on. And they meet, and it goes well, and she starts working for him as a graduate student.
Hey, good professional relationship.
It's a sort of a professional relationship. It becomes more than a professional relationship.
Okay,
as you might imagine. He goes to work in her lab.
Could you say that there was good chemistry between them?
You would say that there's good chemistry between them. Okay. So Pierre and Maria, they are working together, and things are going well. They're a good team. They're working these long hours together. Their relationship starts to get closer. At some point, they become romantically involved. They get married. They have 2 daughters. And this is where the Curie and Marie Curie comes from. Her name was Maria Sklodowska in Poland, but when she marries Pierre Curie, she takes the French version of her name, Marie. She never drops the Sklodowska when she's in her writings, so she always signs things as Marie Sklodowska Curie.
She starts off as Maria Sklodowska. She keeps it. Yep.
Yeah. Because the Polish aspect of her heritage is very important to her, and and to her parents, and very close to home, because that she grew up in an occupied country, and this will come back again as we progress through the story.
Mm-hmm.
So Marie and Pierre, they are working together in this lab, and their research is based around, and like I said, I'm not a physicist, but I will attempt to explain my understanding of their research. It's based around a technology known as the X-ray, which has been invented not too long ago by Wilhelm Röntgen, who kind of identified X-rays. And then there was a French physicist named Henri Becquerel who discovered that uranium gave off similar waves to X-rays. So the Curies, they decided they were going to focus on this as part of their research. Neither of them had their PhDs yet. Marie does encourage Pierre to go for his PhD and get it, which is pretty cool, working on this in this field. Pierre is running kind of a small-time lab, and Marie is an immigrant graduate student. They don't have a lot of money, right? They're struggling. They've got 2 kids. They're working as teachers full time and spending their nights and weekends working in this basically homemade lab that they constructed. First, it was in an old storehouse, and then it was in a shed. And they're just kind of working out of their garage, trying to identify X-rays and figure out, working with uranium in a garage, basically. I think about, the early Amazon or early Microsoft were they're kind of working out of their garage with long hair.
Literally garages, yeah.
Right, literally.
Yeah. So they have a full-time job as teachers, which I imagine took a lot of energy and whatever. And so from the outside, the whole, hey, let's research uranium is a side hustle, but it's a side hustle that they're passionate about.
Yeah, it's what they want to do. They're paying the bills with the teaching thing, but what they want to do is research this stuff. And they can't afford graduate students or supplies, materials. They can barely feed themselves and their kids, right? They're eating the bare minimum of what they can. But the extra money is going into acquiring uranium, which apparently wasn't that difficult in 1903. But
we're talking, this is the time period when tableware and flower vases were made out of uranium just to get that cool kind of yellowish color.
Is that real? I didn't know that.
Yeah, uranium glass. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's cool because it's dishes or vases or like platters or whatever, and they're made out of glass, and the glass has uranium in it. If you have ultraviolet light glowing on uranium glass, it's this cool kind of otherworldly, like ethereal green color.
Is it bad that I want to get some uranium glass now?
I mean, but yeah, like uranium ware is a thing. Yeah.
So
uranium
it
glass,
was not difficult to obtain uranium in...
No, it was a thing.
That's even better, because I assumed that they were like saving up money to buy this like special thing. But I guess nobody knew what radioactivity was at the time anyway. So it was just like, whatever, this is uranium. Like, it makes glass look cool. You get extra buzzed if you drink a bunch of wine out of it.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
I'm not going to try that one at home.
I'm weirdly tempted, but no, I don't think so.
Okay. I mean, okay. I have to say, if you're tempted to like just experiment and put yourself on the line, it's in keeping with the topic of today's podcast. I'm not sure that I recommend it. I feel like I should say, Ben, don't do it. You know? You
should say, Ben, don't do it. Yeah, I should definitely.
Ben, don't do it. Ben, don't
I have a kid.
do it. This is a bad idea. Yeah. Like, do it in your imagination.
Yes, fair.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fair. Anyway, back to Marie Curie. Marie Curie. Yep.
Okay. Point is that I like this better because it even further proves that they had no money to speak of, because uranium was extremely cheap to buy, or whatever. It was relatively cheap to buy. You could go to a store and get your hands on it, bring it into your garage lab and kind of work on it there.
Do a science on it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Nights and weekends. You're staying up. You teach until 6 p.m. You go home, you eat dinner, and then you go to the garage and you work on, you grade homework, and then you go into the garage and you work with uranium, trying to like figure out how to separate these things. No graduate students, no extra supplies. You're eating as cheaply as you can.
Zero grants.
Yes, zero grants, no money involved here. But these two together, they are able to somehow find a way to separate gamma rays from radioactive materials and kind of identify them separately. And they discover, in the process of doing this, they discover two new elements that are completely new to science and physics and chemistry. They name them radium and polonium. So radium, and Pat, you probably know this better than me, it comes from, I read that it comes from the Latin word for ray.
It does. Yeah. So there's a word in Latin, radius, which means like a staff, like the sort of thing that, the wizard Gandalf the Grey might walk around with, and that's the original meaning of the word. But the word radius then gets extended to mean, like, say, the spokes of a wheel.
So radius, like radius, like a radius.
Yeah,
of a
radius.
Circle.
Yeah, like geometry. And the spokes of a wheel, things radiating out from a central point. And that also gets extended to mean the rays of the sun, because if you imagine the sun emitting rays all over the place. So
like a child draws it with the lines coming out of it.
Oh, yeah. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, or the ancient Egyptians, yeah.
Okay, so radium comes from radius or radius.
Yeah.
Polonium is a bit different. Polonium, Marie Curie named after Poland, her home country, which you have to remember was not a country when she named it polonium. It was Poland did not exist as a kingdom or a country or anything. It was the lands that we currently know as Poland had been divided between Austria and Germany and Russia, and so she named it polonium to highlight some of the problems with her home country. So she was able to kind of use her discovery of a new element as a way of like highlighting political issues, which is kind of interesting. Yeah. And, when we say the name Marie Curie now, everybody's like, oh, great scientist, whatever. But like one thing that we really need to keep in mind when we think about Pierre and Marie Curie discovering these two elements is that they literally, in the process of this, laid the groundwork for the entire field of nuclear physics using a setup that they basically dumpster dived out of the back of a Home Depot and set up in their garage with no assistance and no help and no nothing.
Wow.
Like
yeah.
Marie invents the word radioactivity to refer to the release of these X-rays, or which we now know as radiation. And she was able to kind of figure this out, like you said, as a hobby in her nights and weekends with no money involved, no nothing, just kind of doing this because she wanted to see what would happen.
Yeah.
Remember, they're extremely poor at this point. And when they discovered it, they released all of the information that they discovered into the public domain without having, like, they didn't copyright any of it, because they were like, we want people to build off of the research that we've achieved here. Like, we found something cool and we want you guys to work off it. So
let's share this with humanity.
Right. And so they just released it and they didn't make any money off of this, which is really interesting. And the other thing to consider here is that, like, this research came at a great physical cost to them. They didn't quite understand it at the time, but Marie Curie lost 20 pounds during the course of this research, and Pierre started suffering from, he was getting dizzy and he was having some weakness in his muscles and his joints. And they were both suffering from what we would term today radiation sickness, right?
Yeah, from our vantage point in 2024. And at the time,
people were drinking wine out of uranium glass, right? Like, nobody knew what was happening. Nobody had figured this out yet. And maybe they wouldn't have if we hadn't had Marie Curie and Pierre Curie to, like, identify this stuff. I feel
like there's some sort of, like, circular time travel paradox, whatever. Anyway, but yeah, so it took a toll on them, literally, like physically. Yeah.
Physically, monetarily, emotionally. They're both kind of suffering from exhaustion and depression in some cases. And it's hard, right? But they find these two new elements and they discover radioactivity, and they coin the term. And this is interesting. And, what are the possibilities here? And once this is discovered, people start investing in them. Companies start putting money into them to say, hey, where else can you go with this? Like, you've discovered radioactivity, but, like, what does that mean? Is there a way that we can profit off this?
Yeah. The age-old question.
Right. And people start putting money into it, and the Curies are now able to start growing their operations. Their lab becomes part of the Sorbonne, and then in 1903, Marie Curie earns her PhD from the Sorbonne.
So that makes her the first woman in French history to earn a doctorate.
That's true. Yeah,
from a French university.
Yeah. Which, pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Later that same year, 1903, she and Pierre received the Nobel Prize in Physics. So that's a pretty good year. I don't think there's a lot of people that got their PhD the same year that they got the Nobel Prize in that field. I feel like that's rare.
Probably not. I think it's rare.
It's a solid thesis paper.
Very solid, yes.
Yeah, so in the same year, she became the first woman in France to ever be awarded a doctorate, and the first woman in the world to receive a Nobel Prize in any discipline. And it is really important to keep in mind here that Madame Curie is winning the Nobel Prize in 1903, and winning, I always feel like whenever I say somebody won the Medal of Honor, people get mad at me because you didn't win it, you earned it. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
She earned the Nobel Prize in 1903, which is a year that most women in the world couldn't vote or own property.
Yeah.
Which is wild, right? 1903.
And here she is getting this international honor for her intellectual contributions to humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can't vote.
Wow.
She will. She'll be able to vote in her lifetime.
Okay. She can't vote at the moment, but she can do science.
Yes. And so things are looking pretty good for the Curies. They earn the prize together. So the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1903 goes to both of them. And they've got some funding. They've got a lab that's kind of up and coming. Things are looking up for them for now. And it's going to take a little bit of a turn when we get back from this break. And we're going to see what happens with that. So, stick around. Okay, so we are coming back to the story of Marie Curie and Pierre Curie. They were a hardworking couple that were very interested in physics, had worked really hard, very devoted to what they were doing, had struggled through some really hard times, but then made these discoveries. They discovered the elements radium and polonium. They discovered radioactivity. And in 1903, they walked up together to receive the Nobel Prize in Physics. Things are looking good. Funding is coming in, money is good. And then in 1906, Pierre is run over by a horse-drawn carriage in the street and dies unexpectedly out of nowhere.
Oh, no. Oh.
Just
bam.
That's just a thing that happens. I guess nowadays you get hit by a bus, but in 1906 you get run over by a horse-drawn carriage. And just out of nowhere, Nobel laureate walking down the street in Paris. That's it. Bam. Done.
Bam. Yeah.
Awful.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Pierre had been awarded the chair of physics at the Sorbonne, which passed to Marie, making her the first female professor at the university. And she now is the sole heir of the sole person to keep this project running. And
okay, she's the PI, she's the principal investigator.
Yes. And she decides that her quest for the rest of her life is going to be, she loved Pierre very much, and it's going to be to let's continue our work and not let this get forgotten because part of the team went down, right? Let's keep this going and see where it goes.
I mean, she's committed to this. Even before she met Pierre, she was committed to science.
Right.
She was dedicated. She was like, I'm doing this.
Yeah. We're doing this cool thing. And she's going to keep going, right? And she's going to keep going, and she's going to build this radium institute that she wants to build. She's going to build sites in Paris and in Warsaw. And in the future, she will do that, but she starts working on it now, right? But this is a hard time period for Marie Curie. She's a single mother now of 2 daughters. She's a widow. She's working as a professor. She's trying to build these labs and institutes. She also apparently taught her daughter's science class once a week in elementary school, which that would be kind of an interesting thing to have Marie Curie be your high school science teacher or whatever.
That's kind of awesome, actually. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And, teaching younger ages is, you have to know your science, but there's also a whole set of skills with classroom management and whatnot.
Totally different thing, right? It's a totally other thing than teaching college students. And so she's doing all of this. She's still working in the lab. She has some graduate students and stuff who can help her now, but it's not a ton, right? She's still trying to build this up. It's difficult. She starts suffering from depression. She starts having kidney problems. She's still suffering from some of that radiation damage, which we now know is radiation damage, but at the time hadn't been
hindsight,
quite diagnosed.
We know
Yeah, at one point she collapses and has to be hospitalized, but she pushes on. She gets back on her feet. She gets back on the horse. She keeps teaching classes. She keeps training her daughters in science and teaching her daughter's class. And she keeps trying to build up that, try to find funding for the lab, and doing all of the academia stuff. And
there's probably a lot of paperwork involved.
Tons of paperwork involved. Yes, you got to
I'm
show
sure.
your work. Yes.
Yeah.
And so 5 years after the death of Pierre in 1911, Marie Curie wins another Nobel Prize, this time for chemistry rather than physics.
Wow.
So she becomes the first person of any gender to win 2 prizes in 2 different fields. And to this day, she remains the only human who has ever won for 2 different sciences. There's been a couple of people since then who have won 2 awards, but generally they win in their field and then they win the Peace Prize or whatever, right? But
okay.
Or they win 2 in the same field, but she earned it in chemistry and physics, which 2 different fields that's never been done before or since by a man or woman.
Yeah.
And her family ends up becoming very famous for their Nobel Prize contributions because she and Pierre each got the physics one, she gets the chemistry one. Her daughter, who she's been teaching her class, her daughter Irene, ends up becoming a Nobel laureate in chemistry later on as well.
Oh, yeah. Irene Curie, she discovers that radioactive atoms could be created artificially, apparently. Her son-in-law, that is to say, the husband of her second daughter, Eve, gets a Nobel Peace Prize. And this is a guy named Henry Labouisse. And he did a lot of things. And he was, among other things, the executive director of the UNRWA from 1954 to 1958, which is a way of saying he did a lot of work with Palestinian refugees. But what got him the Nobel Prize was that he was the director of UNICEF. And in 1965, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to UNICEF, of which Marie Curie's son-in-law was the director.
Yes. And so because Irene earned the chemistry award with her husband, now the Curies as a family, between Pierre, Marie, Irene, her husband, and Henry Labouisse, there are 5 Nobel laureates in the Curie nuclear family, which is just blows away the record for any other family. There are other families that have 2. Generally, it's either a husband and wife or 2 brothers, or father son or whatever. But nobody has 3, and they got 5.
Parent child, yeah. And then you said nuclear family. I feel like that's a science joke.
I did that on purpose.
Okay, good. Yeah.
And so that's Marie Curie. And there's a story that I do want to mention. Around the time that Marie Curie is earning the Nobel Prize in chemistry, around that time, 1911, there is a story circulating that Marie Curie has been sleeping with one of her graduate students. The graduate student had been a graduate student of Pierre's, and he was married, although they'd been separated for a while, but it was kind of scandalous. In my mind, the Marie Curie with her graduate student is a little sexier than, the fact that the guy was Paul Langevin, the creator of Langevin dynamics and the Langevin equation. He's only a couple years younger than her. It did cause quite a scandal in 1911. Because 1911, and the Nobel Prize Committee advised Marie Curie not to come receive the prize in person because it would be too scandalous.
Okay, they don't have much experience, do they? Okay, on the one hand, it's 2024 and do not sleep with your grad students. That's a bad idea. But this is 1911?
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay, honestly, Nobel Committee, what are you thinking?
I mean, what do you think Marie did?
I'm guessing she just kind of sauntered on over and said, why, thank you. I will receive my Nobel Prize.
You're damn right she didn't. Because this is Marie Curie. And,
this is Marie Curie. Yeah.
And this is a thing that we haven't talked about yet, but that is very central to the story of Marie Curie, which is that the French government and the French people never fully accepted her as French, even though, she'd kind of moved there at 24. She never left. Most of her great achievements had come in France. But she had this very complicated relationship with France where she had been denied, after being a double Nobel laureate, she had been denied access onto like the French Academy of Sciences. And in the media and amongst politicians and, people talking, she was always kind of portrayed as this like foreigner, this outsider. She was a Polish immigrant. She wasn't one of us, very Parisian, I guess. But like, she never felt accepted or was accepted by the French or by Paris, except for when she was receiving Nobel Prizes, and then she was a great hero of France because
it's like, whatever. Whoa, go team, go France.
But she's not one of us, right? And so she had this kind of complicated relationship with France, and even in her home country, she's not wanted Poland to be its own country, and that didn't work for the Germans and the Austrians and the Russians, and
that was not happening at the moment.
Right, exactly. So she was kind of used to being on the outside, and so Nobel Prize committee telling her not to come pick up her award, or whoever it was that told her not to come pick up the award, just she's like la la la. Yeah, you can stick it, right?
You know what? I'm doing this for science. Or I'm doing this for me.
I don't care. I'm picking up my award. You're not gonna. You are gonna have to arrest me on stage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You are gonna have to throw me out of that building, and that's gonna be embarrassing for you. So, as much as we kind of just said she wasn't particularly patriotic for France. In 1914, World War I begins in Europe, and the early battles of World War I go very badly for France. And Marie Curie is operating in Paris, which, And so in the early days of World War I, the Germans got very, very close to taking Paris early in the war. There's a famous story where all of the taxis in Paris were mobilized to literally ferry troops from the barracks to the front lines. And so we are in Paris in 1914. There are you can hear the artillery from where she's at. And the graduate students that are working in her lab, they have to leave to go fight in the war, right? They're mostly men, and they are leaving to go fight and serve their country in the war, right? And Marie Curie, who, remember, she was never really fully accepted. That doesn't matter to her, right? She is French as far as she's concerned, and she's going to help in this scenario any way that she can.
So how does a Nobel Award-winning physicist/chemist help in the war effort?
Well, France needs money. And what does she do? She offers both of her golden Nobel Prize awards to France to be melted down and used in the war effort to pay for things. They deny it. They say no, they're not going to take her Nobel Prizes. They're not going to melt her Nobel Prizes down. But she offers. But what she does is Nobel Prize also comes with an award of $1 million. And so she uses that money, all that money that she gained from those two awards that she had left, that she hadn't already put into her research. She puts those into the war effort. And the way that she chooses to do this is by literally going to the front lines herself. So
to do what?
So Marie Curie and 17-year-old Irene she's 17 now.
Her daughter.
We've said she's gonna win the Nobel Prize or earn the Nobel Prize later on. But
spoilers. Yeah.
Yeah. But they get in a mobile radiation therapy truck, and they drive to the front lines. And so what Marie Curie does during World War I, one of the most bloody and brutal wars in human history, is she sets up stations. You remember she knew about X-rays, and she had technology to take X-rays. And that was not a common thing in the world at the time. So she can set up mobile stations and fixed stations. She sets up, all told, 20 mobile trucks, like X-ray trucks, and 200 fixed hospitals that can do X-ray radiation, whether that is to identify broken bones, reset broken bones, or at some point she starts using gamma radiation to alleviate the pain from battle-wounded soldiers.
So that's kind of chemotherapy, right?
Right. It's the basis of chemotherapy. It's where that kind of comes from.
Yeah.
We realized that it was later learned that the radiation from that is actually kind of messes you up, but it does alleviate pain. But this is the basis of chemotherapy. This is where chemo comes from. And in the process, she also ends up training. She becomes the director of the Red Cross Radiology Service,
which is now a thing. I mean, there was a point where there was not a Red Cross Radiology Service.
Yeah, she invents it and becomes a director of it. She trains hundreds of women how to operate radiology equipment, whether that's IDing X-rays or breaking broken bones or various other things that you can do with radiology. And at some point later on, she's granted the Legion of Honor from the French government for her service during the war.
How did that go over with her? Because
she refused it. But she got it.
Okay.
She was awarded it and said no.
Yeah.
Because, like we said, it was complicated. The Legion of Honor had only been awarded to her after other governments had awarded medals to her. So she'd earned medals for bravery in World War I from England and the US. And then France was like, well, actually, we should probably get in on this. They gave her the Legion of Honor. She said no.
Jumps on the bandwagon.
You can keep it. You can put it somewhere.
Where the sun don't shine. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So World War I ends, and Marie Curie, she goes back to her research after the war is over. She serves in the medical service through the war. Afterwards, she goes back and she continues working with radioactive materials. And at some point, it becomes clear that this is harmful, right? This is not, like, working with radiation is going to be hazardous to your health. She realizes it, and she kind of realizes it.
From 2024, we're kind of waiting for that shoe to drop.
Right. So she figures it out. But here's the interesting bit of it, is that she realizes it, but she also figures, like, I think it's too late for me. It might not be too late for everybody else. So she starts implementing procedures to kind of mitigate radiation exposure for other people studying this stuff.
Yeah. So this consists of lead barriers, lead shields. I mean, lead. It's lead. It blocks radiation, and she encourages researchers that she works with to go and get their blood tested. And she also says, go outside and get fresh air. And honestly, that's good advice, even if you're not working in a radiation lab.
Yeah, that's true. Huh? It's just good for your mental health.
Yes. Touch grass.
Yes.
Marie Curie says, touch grass.
Yeah. But the working behind lead barriers was a Marie Curie thing.
So every time I go to the dentist and they take x-rays and they have me put on that lead apron, that's ultimately due to Marie Curie, Marie Sklodowska-Curie.
Yes. Yeah. But for Marie Curie, she's kind of decided that she's already been exposed enough. Like, there's nothing I can do. Like, by the time it becomes obvious that radiation is harmful, her take on it is like, I'm probably already as damaged by this as I can be. And so she decides she's going to take one for the team. And you can find her, you could find her towards the end of her life, like, in her goggles, in radioactive material, arms deep in radioactive material, and working with basically, those hockey players that didn't wear helmets kind of thing, right? Like the old school hockey guys.
So she's raw dogging it. Yeah.
Right. Yes. And she, she of course, like she wore like a gram of radium around her neck for most of her life. Like that was, a thing that reminded her of Pierre Curie. Right. And, and so she does, of course, succumb to it. She dies of of an illness that is almost certainly radiation related. She dies in 1934 at the age of 66.
But what a 66 years it's been.
Right. She grew up in like she lived in poverty for long periods of her life. She worked with radiation for most of her life. She survived a war, right? She lived to be 66. That ain't bad.
Yeah. And she went out and helped with the war.
Right. She was on the front lines of a war. And, and 66 years old for anybody in 1934 is pretty good too.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's be fair. Yeah. Let's be fair. Yeah. It's not nothing.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. Here's a bit I love about her is that everything in her home had been so exposed to radiation that even today it has to all be stored in lead boxes. Literally, you can't even handle her cookbooks without wearing protective anti-radiation gear.
Wow. Okay. So that's a thing to keep in mind when you deal with the Marie Curie archives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hazmat gear.
Hazmat gear. Yep. Yeah. Well.
Nuclear, biological, chemical, whatever that full suit, full Monsters Inc. suit.
Well, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, she was committed to her project.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yes, she passes away at age 66. She and Pierre are now interred in the Pantheon in Paris. She was the first, and the way it's described, they have all these weird technical terms for how you describe the first of something. She is the first woman interred in the Pantheon because of things that she did during her life. Not the wife of a person, but she did the thing.
For her own achievements. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
That is, yes.
So her research is interesting because in basically discovering radiation and radiotherapy and all of this, her research led not only to chemotherapy, but also to atomic bombs. So that's kind of like that's an interesting duality.
Yes.
Of her research.
One saves lives, one doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Curie is now the name of the standard unit of radiation, and the radioactive element curium is named after her.
So she got to name radium and polonium, and then she got a third element named after her.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You can find her name on various science awards, nuclear power stations, universities, research institutes, and charitable organizations. And in 2011, it was the year of chemistry in the world. This is one of these UN, like year of Ataturk kind of things. And Poland decided that if it was going to be the year of chemistry, it should be the year of Marie Curie. And so they declared 2011 the year of Marie Curie in Poland.
So Poland, her homeland.
Which was a country in 2011, which it was not when she left there at age 24.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, Marie Curie. Marie Sklodowska Curie.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that is our story for today. It's a little different. We don't have a lot of death and destruction and mayhem. We do have a little bit of World War I, but
it's radioactive.
It's radioactive. It's a badass scientist, and we haven't done one of those yet, and we should.
Yeah. Yes.
So that is our story for today. Thank you guys so much for listening. We really appreciate you, and we're glad for all the support that you guys give us. And we really hope that you will keep listening and you'll stick with us on the next one. So thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is an iHeartRadio podcast produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are Andrew Jacobs, me, Pat Larish, and my co-host, Ben Thompson. Writing is by me and Ben. Story editing is by Ian Jacobs, Brandon Phibbs. Mixing and music and sound design is by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeart. Badass of the Week is based on the website badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions, ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like the podcast, subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and your enemies if you want, as we'll be back next week with another one. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.